Hello, I'm Hal Lublin.
And I'm Mark Gagliardi.
Since the dawn of humanity, one issue has gone unsettled. With the fate of the world in the balance, we're here to settle, once and for all, Best Steve Martin role.
That's right. Don't worry, everyone. We got this.
Podcast should have a theme song. Podcast should not have a theme song. Yes, they should. No, they shouldn't. They sound good. Yeah, but people are just going to skip past it. You know what? You're right. We got this.
What's up, you wild and crazy guy?
Hey, we're going to fix something out with our tight trousers.
You're a Steve Martin fan, right, Hal?
I am a Steve Martin fan. I recently watched, as soon as it was out, we were watching the Steve Martin documentary.
The Apple Plus doc. I have not watched that. Was that what gave you this idea for this episode?
Yeah, it's, it just seems timely. Certainly he's a guy who should be celebrated. He's had an interesting career. Not only is the biggest stand-up comedian in the world for a time, but his transition into movies is really interesting, and he's done some interesting work. Like you think of a comedian and you think of like bits. I feel like we think of Steve Martin and bits. And he's actually has some really good characters in here and roles. So when I think of Steve Martin role, I maybe don't think of like, what is the funniest? I think of like, how much meat was on the bone there? What has he done? What did he do with that?
Well, this is an interesting way that you worded this too. First of all, hi. We just jumped right in. How are you? It's nice to see you.
Ken was like, all right, we're going to get started.
I know Ken, literally the only word Ken has said to us, since this meeting started was, you guys ready? Are you okay, Ken? Is everything okay? Yeah, we were already recording at that point too.
Mr. Ken Cade. He's standing there with his arms crossed, just sort of, actually he's shaking his head. He doesn't nod.
Yeah, no.
Shaking his head and start.
I've never met Ken Plume. He might be like Claw from Inspector Gadget, where if you turn Ken's chair around, it's just a glove with a handcuff on it.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, Ken is good. Okay. He is the Charlie to our angels.
That's right.
Did you read Born Standing Up?
I did.
I loved Born Standing Up.
Yes.
I am a guy who also, I love that Steve Martin began his career in the theme parks. I think that's so cool as a guy who spent a lot of time in theme parks. In fact, at the same theater that I have worked at, two of the same theaters I've worked at, started at the Birdcage Theater at Knott's Berry Farm and then moved over to Disneyland, where I don't know if he ever performed at the Golden Horseshoe. I know he used to go sit and watch Wally Bogue, which is, to be honest, where he got a lot of his act. Was directly from Wally Bogue. He just put it into a comedy club context, which was his big genius. Yeah. And speaking of genius, that's one thing about Steve Martin that I think is the coolest is he's played these big wacky characters, but he is a legit Mensa card carrying genius. I think his college degree was in like logic and rhetoric or something. Like he's very classical, old school. Yeah. Just a kind of a Renaissance brainiac. I would argue that what he did in the stand-up world, knowing through the years how his brain works and having watched his brain work for so long, are we going to put Steve Martin, the stand-up character that he created, up as one of his roles?
I would.
Or are you just thinking of movie roles?
I think there's shades of that, certainly in every comedy that he's done. Playing like the arrogant idiot, which was sort of his main comic persona that he honed, but really his approach. What fascinates me about Steve Martin, his approach to comedy and then later in making films is the extent to which he took notes and really, I've always been of the opinion you can't teach someone to be funny.
Right.
You can teach them to understand the mechanics to the point where you know how to serve things. But there is an innate ability in there as well. Doesn't mean somebody who isn't innately funny can't be funny, but it's hard to teach them that. Like you all you can do is learn sort of the moving pieces and figure out how to best serve comedy.
Yeah.
And that's a really great thing to do.
Well, and I think he served comedy in a way that no one else was doing at the time he was doing it. I think it's like, he worked on the Smothers Brothers. The guy knows subversive political comedy. And the fact that at a time where the world was full of subversive political comedians making statements, Steve Martin very deliberately went, I'm going to put a fake arrow through my head. I'm going to do balloon animals. I'm just going to be purely silly. And that was almost itself an act of subversion.
Yeah. 100%. It's what made him stand out. And the way he logged every moment of his career in terms of what worked, what didn't, is something that carried over into his film work. He had early success and then a string of flops. And then he went back and sort of really studied, well, what makes all of this work? What are the actual, if I had to draw a mathematical equation or series of equations that would create a comedy film, what would that be? And then the work that he did that came out of that was The Three Amigos, which obviously he had co-writers on, but the concept was his, and that came out of his studying, going, all right, well, why do I laugh at this moment in this film? And so the way that he approaches stuff, because there's something so impersonal about him that kind of gets explored. Like, he was always very guarded, and that came from his relationship with his family. But there also is a warmth to him and something welcoming and something very relatable. And he manages to work that into all of these roles. There are some that stand out to me as sort of like, these are kind of the finalists. Like, I don't think we have to talk about every single movie he ever did, but I think we can go sort of back and forth and nominate stuff.
Sure.
That's kind of how I want to approach this, and maybe talk about what we like about that performance. Yeah. But to bring it all around full circle, when you talk about again, because he put that work into his comedy, because that persona was so well established, there's something of that in everything he's done. So I think taking that role, that to me is it was as much a role as it was him honestly figuring out, this is what I think is funny, I'm going to put it in front of you, rather than I'm inhabiting this character and portraying them on stage. And it's a little bit different to me.
I did not know this documentary existed until today. I was talking to my counterpart at work, Lauren, and she was saying, I mentioned that this was our topic for tonight, and she was like, oh my gosh, have you seen the doc yet? And I thought, oh my God, no, I did not even know that the doc existed. And the fact that Steve Martin narrates his own doc about himself is pretty great. Yeah, I think that his brain is so fascinating to me, and the way that he works, like just little things that he thought of, like, I'm going to wear a white suit on stage because when I do stand-up shows, I'm playing these giant arenas and I need to be seen. Like just simple things like that. And taking the idea that he would take what he's given, the room that he's in, and say, okay, now I am a comedian who is playing small clubs. Great. This is what my version of being in a small club is. He translates everything real well. When he moved to giant stadiums and started playing big stadiums, he was like, okay, now I'm going to do these big crowd work, sweeping, conduct the crowd kind of moves, because that's the room that I'm given to do this. And I think he's been given roles big and small, and he's created roles big and small for movies. And I think that it's not necessarily, I don't think his best one necessarily is going to have to come from one of the ones that's a starring vehicle for him, or it could come from something smaller. I think he's got a lot of great stuff in a lot of different genres, other people's work, his work, not to mention his writing. I loved Picasso at the Le Pan Agile. I think I'm just a big Steve Martin fan, always have been. I like your idea of
what's going on with your voice before we really get into this. What happened?
I have, in the last few days, I've done, let's see, what's 7 times 6?
Oh, let's see if you figure this out.
42. So I've done 42 shows on stage, and I've narrated a 10-hour audiobook all the way, just straight through in the last 7 days. I got nothing left in the tank. We're doing 2 episodes tonight. By the time we get to our second episode, I may just sound like this.
You're just going to sound like you're at the back half of Crawling Through a Desert.
Yeah.
I really want to listen to the audiobook where it's like, chapter 4. Oh.
Yeah. I feel like I'm crawling through a desert while doing a Brenda Vaccaro and Kathleen Turner impression. But I'd love to I think we can divide it up into 2 different sections. Okay. And I would love to have one from each, because I think there really are 2 different Steve Martins. That when we can throw out our contenders from each section individually, pit our final 2 against each other, because I really do think there are 2 Steve Martins. There is the character actor, swing for the fences Steve Martin, and there is the underplayed, playing it close to home Steve Martin. You know what I mean?
Okay.
There's the Inspector Clouseau Steve Martin, and there's the Parenthood Steve Martin.
Do you allow for the fact that it's possible the 2 finalists could come from one of those categories? Because there might be one that's, rather than like, oh, because here's the thing when we break into categories, sometimes it makes sense to me and other times it's like, well, we're dividing it to divide it. And it gives us something to talk about. Yeah. But it is possible that there are two finalists. Maybe two of his insane characters are the finalists.
Sure.
Maybe it's two of his more dramatic roles. But if you want to explore it in that way, I'm fine with that. Does that sound good? Do we have an accord there?
Sure. I will always err on the side of any form of structure.
Right. And I think I like sort of the discussion of it. Obviously, we're both fans of Steve Martin.
Sure.
We both had rather large gaps that we have filled in preparation of this. I'd never seen The Jerk. You had not yet seen Only Murders in the Building.
Right.
So his first film and his most recent television show, which is a fascinating kind of bookend.
Well, it's also fascinating to me because the way you worded this is best Steve Martin role, not best Steve Martin movie. So I think that this is a very specific thing that we are looking for. And I don't think it's Only Murders in the Building. I think he wrote a brilliant show. He filled a show with brilliant people and has brilliant comic timing, but he's playing Steve Martin in this. And a lot of times I think he's playing Steve Martin.
I don't think it's the winner, but I think it's a better role than maybe you're giving it credit for just because he's never, I mean, obviously, and you learn this more when you watch the documentary, he has a ton of anxiety specific about his performance and how well he's doing and what people think of him. And you do see a lot of that in Charles Hayden Savage. But I think the part that you don't really see of that is actually Steve Martin is this idea that he's still living off of Brazos, that like he assumes everybody's seen Brazos and that he is a much bigger celebrity than he actually is. And that is a really fun twist that I feel like I haven't really seen from Steve Martin before. It's like the faded star.
Yeah.
And his version of it is great.
Yeah. And it reminds me a little bit of Bowfinger just because it's people in show business.
Yes. Yeah. That's another good. Well,
but that's also a great hook that Steve Martin has is one of the tropes of Steve Martin is I am famous person Steve Martin.
Right.
You know what I mean? One other question for you.
Yeah.
In this, I would like to include, because I think it would be fun to include, and I don't know how many of them there are, because we just said best Steve Martin role.
Yeah.
He played some characters on Saturday Night Live that are iconic.
Sure.
So I think I may have at least one of those that I'd want to throw into the mix.
The Fest-Drunk brother?
Boy, specifically his Fest-Drunk brother.
Yeah.
Are there any, King Tut, that was just him singing a song.
King Tut was I feel like didn't have a ton of recurring stuff after the first 5 years.
No.
He just did a ton of things like, Christopher Walken has the Continental. Tom Hanks had Mr. Short-Term Memory. There are certain hosts. Emma Stone plays the girl in the poster on the wall. It's like, big, stinky hot dog. There are hosts who have more recurring characters than he did. He was kind of laid that foundation with Dan Aykroyd doing the Czech Brothers.
The wild and crazy guys, the Czech.
Do you want to kick off with that?
Sure, we'll kick off with
more
that.
Charactery stuff?
Let's start with his big charactery stuff. I've got 6 on my list.
Okay.
I don't know how many you've got on yours, but you want to?
I didn't divide up my list that way. I'm just sort of freewheeling it. So
fair. You freewheeling it? Who would have guessed?
But I certainly have thoughts based on how you're dividing them.
Good. So that'll be my first one then. The Fest-Drunk brothers. Or what is his Fest-Drunk brother's name?
I can't remember who plays who. And I used to remember their first names and I don't anymore.
This is why when we play trivia with Ken, we don't pick the SNL trivia. They're so hard.
We do pick it because we're not afraid. I'm afraid. Safe.
I'm afraid, Hal.
You know what? I don't play a basketball game to take a bunch of layups. I want to shoot threes. I want to try and dunk the ball. You want to try and do everything. It's fun. It's a challenge.
That is a good analogy because much like I have no idea how to navigate the Golden Girls Trivial Pursuit box set, I also don't know how to dunk.
Yes.
Georg. It was Yortuk and Georg. Thank you, Ken Plume. Steve Martin played Georg Fest-Drunk.
There it is. I couldn't remember who was Yortuk, but of course, because it was the name I remembered, it would have to be Dan Aykroyd and not Steve Martin. Yeah, they're fun characters. They're fun plays on, I feel like we didn't really get that much of them. It was very kind of similar. I think they were vacuum cleaner salesmen initially.
Is that what they were?
That was their deal?
Or I just know them going out.
No, that was what they did.
They're just going out to party,
for a living. Yeah, they're always looking to party. They have the chest hair, they have the medallions, the shirts, the polyester slacks. They're doing everything possible to party, and they want to score with women. That's their main drive.
I feel like those characters are so like, yeah, I think that's a big thing too, is like the characters having a very specific want and focus. And I'll get back to that on some that we talk about later. But I feel like I've met these guys. I feel like I saw the lampooning of these guys before I saw these actual guys, because I saw the Fest Drunk Brothers when I was a kid. And then I saw the real life Fest Drunk Brothers going out to clubs in my 20s in Los Angeles.
Yeah, it is a real.
You're like, oh, this is a real thing. These are real dudes that are really like this. We used to have a guy that when I worked at the Standard that would come into the Standard all the time. His name was Ridiculous Nicholas. His name was Nicholas, but we called him Ridiculous Nicholas because the way that he flirted with girls was, I can pull my lip over my nose. Want to make out?
Yeah. If it's real, they're definitely based on real people. As far out as it is.
So fun.
But there is, it is a sketch. It is particularly an SNL sketch. So it's just going to be.
There's no depth to it.
You hit on something the first time, you add a little bit the next time, and then you can just recycle the hits every single time. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just what the SNL kind of factory demands. Like, every samurai sketch was really fun, especially the Buck Henry ones. I don't think there was anybody better at playing against Belushi as the straight man for those than him. But it's going to be this, what's going to happen. He's going to threaten seppuku. He's going to chop something in half. And the end of it is going to seem like a very violent act that gets paused over the title card. Okay. So that's a good one to start with. I'll throw out another one, a smaller one, which was a minor role that picked up a lot of acclaim and led to the return of Bill Murray from a self-imposed.
I know where you're going with this.
A self-imposed break from making movies, and that is his role as Orin Scrivello, DDS, in Little Shop of Horrors. Definitely against type for anything we'd seen him do before.
Sure.
He plays it full on out. He is not likable at all. As much as you see like the physicality of him, he is a terrible human being, and he plays that both for laughs and like in a seriously threatening way. He's an abusive boyfriend and a sadist, and he manages to catch both sides of that really well. But it is a ridiculously over the top character because it is a Broadway musical committed to film, and a very good one at that.
And I think he acts well in it. That's one thing about it that I think is great, is he really is. He is menacing.
Yes.
It's the fact that he's the one doing it. And at this point in the 80s where he's doing these wacky things, just to have the wacky guy play this character. I think it was just an inspired bit of casting. He's got that jet black greasy hair in it. There's the scene with the laughing gas where, Rick Moranis is giving him laughing gas as, Seymour. And so, he's got his big musical number, and we get to hear him sing in it.
Yeah.
So he's got a good voice. He's singing through it. And then you have that scene with the laughing gas where he actually dies. His death scene, spoiler, it's a Little Shop of Horrors. There's a lot of people dying in it.
Yeah.
But I think that's a great role. I want to jump to another one while we're talking about swings for the fences that are outside of how you would normally cast him. And working with Rick Moranis, I'd love to talk about him playing Vinny in My Blue Heaven.
Such a great movie.
Like that
underrated movie. Like
underrated movie. People forget. It's Steve Martin with a hilarious, I think it might have been supposed to be a pompadour, but it looks just like a flat top.
It's a buzz cut. No, it's a flat top buzz cut. Like, but it's
not buzz. It's just tall. Yeah. It's really tall.
Not that. It's not like a high top fade. It's like, but it is like, it's not a brush cut, but it is a spiked hair.
Yeah. It's like a good 2-inch, flat top.
Yes. In this movie, he's a mobster under the protection of Rick Moranis, who is an FBI agent, I believe.
And he's doing this sort of like he's really going big with the voice in this one. And his suits are all like metallic and bonkers. Like this is Steve Martin having an absolute blast playing a character that if anybody else did it, and all borderline this version, it would be too over the top to be believed. Like, I am an Italian American. It's borderline offensive to Italians.
Sure. It's very kind of you to say borderline.
Yeah, it's borderline.
He's like a step away from every line being like, E-O-O-A-D-O-A, yo.
I mean, yeah, as Eric, our buddy Eric, calls those roles Dems and Does.
Yeah, exactly. He's playing a Dems and Does guy.
He's playing a Dems and Does.
He also, like, there is a pattern in his career. Some of these are really solo efforts, but I feel like he's at his best in an ensemble or like a two-hander. That's him and Rick Moranis. So that he's got someone to play off of. The Three Amigos, which I'm sure we're going to touch on pretty shortly. Again, like when he doesn't have to carry the film, it almost gives more room to play, like more permission, because there isn't the same amount of pressure.
Yeah. It's interesting. Let's talk about Three Amigos then. We can jump into Three Amigos now. That's him, Martin Short, and Chevy Chase. Yeah. And this is an interesting one for me because I think it's a combination of that persona of how did you put it? The guy he's like crazy. He thinks he's higher status.
Arrogant idiot.
Arrogant idiot. That was it.
Yeah.
It's a great version of Arrogant Idiot.
Yeah.
I'm not certain it's his best role, even though I've always liked the movie. The movie, is one of those that in 2024 doesn't necessarily hold up terribly well with its three white saviors coming into a town.
Yeah. I mean, for the conceit, it makes sense why they're there. It's really more of like a Tropic Thunder, which is also a movie that 16 years later, you can't really view through the same lens, but it also is like a whole film. It's really a series of sketches. He wrote it with Lorne Michaels and Randy Newman, but it was his concept. So it's all these different bits and things he wanted to have in there. I think the Singing Bush and Invisible Swordsman were things that they were like, he really wanted to do. So they just figured out how to put it in there. And it's hilarious. It plays well for laughs. He's really funny in it.
He's kind of the straight man in it, though.
They all have, sometimes they're all the straight man. They take turns. Someone's being crazy. The other two are the straight man. And they keep cycling through it, which is really fun. I look at it and go like, there are three people who are very good at comedy working well together and doing a bunch of really funny scenes that connect to sort of tell a story. But it doesn't strike me as like a great role.
Right. I would say the movie is greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
And he is one of the parts in that, but our ultimate winner of the best Steve Martin role is probably not going to be one where he is one of the parts.
I agree.
You know what I mean?
I agree.
Unless he's a big standout.
I'm going to throw out one. Let's just go to his first movie. We have to talk about Nathan Johnson in The Jerk. I just watched it.
Yeah.
For the very first time. And I put it on Letterboxd. I log everything I watch on Letterboxd and I give it a rating. It gets a 5-star rating system. What do you think I gave that movie? Just curious what you think.
I'm going to guess that you gave The Jerk 3 stars.
Or I gave it 3.5. That's very good. His performance is really funny. There are a lot of really funny jokes in it.
Yeah.
Obviously, he is able to carry the movie, which is a very big test for him in 1979, because he'd appeared in some things, but this was his real, like, big swing. It's him and Carl Reiner, Bernadette Peters in there.
It's really, really, really funny.
Yeah, it's got a lot of
untethered to reality. That to me is, I think the flaw of this role is there's nothing that grounds Naven.
Well, he's so naive.
Yeah.
And he's just as naive at the end as that every time you think he's going to grow, he doesn't. And there's a lot of fun stuff, but I think honestly, from a role perspective, there's no question he's great in it because he's Steve Martin playing like a character literally created for him.
Yeah. But it's peak Steve Martin. It's peak early Steve Martin,
but there's no growth in the character. And so for me as a role, I wouldn't say it's his best role, even though I know it's a beloved movie. I totally get why it didn't hit me exactly the same. Maybe because I watched it a little bit too, like I didn't watch it I think if I watched it younger, it might have hooked in at a different time. But I watch it now and go, oh, it's good. He's really funny. I've laughed out loud plenty of times. I don't think it's his best role.
No, I think, again, he's very funny in it. It's really great early Steve Martin work. But because of that, I mean, it's called The Jerk. And he goes from being naive to being a rich jerk who never loses his naivete.
Do you want to throw out what I'm guessing is like really the final finalist in this category?
Well, I have a couple of honorable mentions. His Clouseau is bonkers, but Peter Sellers was better. He's brilliant in Baby Mama as Tina Fey's boss.
As the Whole Foods CEO.
Oh, yeah. With his, I'm going to now give you 30 seconds of uninterrupted eye contact or whatever the duration of time.
That's it. Uninterrupted. And then he stares at her. He's playing Barry.
So funny. but it's like an SNL sketch. He's doing one thing.
Really fun.
The role where he gets to, I think I would put this up there as maybe if not a finalist from this big character, Steve Martin. And this is Steve Martin getting to play in ways that he played in The Jerk, but with a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And that reason is he is a con man trying to get money.
Sure.
He is a dirty, rotten scoundrel along with Michael Caine. And he actually has a beautiful arc of growth in this story. Yeah, I think Dirty Rotten Scoundrels is one that comes out of this. Maybe The Dentist and Little Shop of Horrors. My Blue Heaven is is so over the top. But yeah. I think that as Freddy in Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, it's Steve Martin getting to play Steve Martin, but also to act.
Yeah, it's really smart. He gets to do a lot of fun stuff. I mean, the most memorable parts of the movie are all his.
Yeah.
I mean, can I go to the bathroom? Why is there a cork on the fork? The Oklahoma. Again, that movie probably be a little different if you made it now as opposed to almost 40 years ago at this point. Isn't that crazy?
40 years ago. What year was that? I thought it was the 90s.
87. 1987.
Wow.
Or 88 rather. So it's 36 years ago that movie came out. Isn't that crazy?
That movie is so fun and he's so great in it. Yeah, before we go to the break, there's one other one I want to talk about besides Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. We're going to come back to Dirty Rotten Scoundrels.
Okay.
I'm sure, because that's definitely going into the finals. There is one movie that I think bridges both a character that he is playing that is close to home and a big swing for the fences character. And it's the movie where anytime he is doing big physical comedy or a voice that is not his own in this movie, it is not his decision to do. It is because he is under duress, because he is possessed by the ghost of Lily Tomlin in All of Me.
Never did I think.
That is Steve Martin trying to play it straight. Yeah. But Lily Tomlin controlling his body. And the scene where the two of them are both wrestling over who controls Steve Martin's body, the Lily Tomlin ghost inside him or Steve Martin.
Yeah.
It is a masterclass in physical comedy because it's not just slapstick for the sake of slapstick. Every physical move he makes in that has a point. And when he's doing her voice, the scenes where he's speaking as her, I think that one bridges the gap to me, much in the same way when we talked about best Bill Murray performances. And we wound up with the one that seemed to split the gap between early comedy Bill Murray and later sad sack Bill Murray being Groundhog Day. I think All of Me is one of those films that it just hits such a sweet spot for me of Steve Martin being, even there are moments when he's the straight man. The whole Beck and Bull scene is Steve Martin playing straight man to the, mystic who has put the soul inside the bull. I think that is a brilliant performance. I think it's an underrated, and nowadays it is an underrated performance.
Yeah, I did not think we were going to be talking about All of Me even once over the course of this episode. And here we are. Yeah, it's a really great performance. Obviously, the physicality is great. I think if you want to consider it, we can. I don't think it's going to hold up the way Freddie Benson will against some of the heavy hitters in the other category. So
I just wanted to make sure it did not get short shrift.
It has been shrifted the right amount. We're going to take a break. Then we're going to come back and we're going to look at the slightly more dramatic side, or maybe heavily more dramatic side of Steve Martin. So stick around. But first, listen to this.
It's Webby season. Hi, I'm Sequoia Holmes, host of the Black People Love Paramore podcast, and we are nominated for a Webby for the episode where I interviewed Hayley Williams. In case you're unfamiliar, Black People Love Paramore is a podcast delving into the common and uncommon interests of Black people in order to help us feel more seen. We would love your vote to help us win this Webby. Please take a second, go over to the Black People Love Paramore podcast social media accounts, and you can find them at BPLP Pod across all social media platforms. Hit the link in bio and vote for Black People Love Paramore.
Hi, I'm Travis McElroy.
And I'm Teresa McElroy.
And we're the hosts of Schmanners. If you're looking for a good place to jump into our show, we really recommend either the Playgrounds episode or the job interviews episode.
Or if you want to go way back, you can check out the episode where we compare the differences between afternoon tea and high tea. So check out those episodes and new episodes every Friday on Maximum Fun or wherever you get your podcasts.
And we are back. Over the break, Ken Plume pointed out Steve Martin's performance in Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, where he sings Maxwell's Silver Hammer.
Really didn't think we were going to talk about that one.
No, me neither. It's fun. It is,
really ridiculous. He just dangles something shiny in the water. You just bite right down on it, don't you?
Yeah, I really do. I always know when Ken goes, hang on a second, that my screen is going to switch to share mode and I'm going to watch a video that is going to play in my headphones at a screamingly loud volume.
I didn't think it was that loud. It was too loud for you?
It's always too loud for me. Everything's too loud for me.
Are you the guy who
turn that noise down?
You have no one who lives above you if people live below you. Do you ever stomp on the floor because they're being too loud? Have you ever done that?
No, I think that I might drive them crazy. They might hear me up here more. I've never heard them downstairs.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about some close to home Steve Martin performances. I say close to home, meaning more grounded, human, realistic performances.
Okay. I'll start us off. Man, this one is the comedy for him comes out of the circumstance, but he's most certainly the straight man. This movie has incredible heart and also features one of the best John Candy performances. I don't personally think it's his best. I would say Uncle Buck is probably his best performance top to bottom, but I'm talking about Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, in which Steve Martin plays Neil Page, who is the guy trying to get home to his family. And then John Candy's character becomes attached to him. You find out why later on. It is heartbreaking. And so you see this sort of how this relationship goes of Steve Martin being borderline abusive to this guy who's maybe not as aware of how annoying he's being in certain ways and other ways is hyper aware and is trying his best. And it has that whole I like me speech after Steve Martin berated him in their hotel room.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a finalist because number one, he carries it off perfectly. Like it is a very not Steve Martin role in terms of what a heavy he is. Like he is sort of a heavy in that film. It is stuff Little Shop of Horrors where he also plays a heavy, but I also think the reason why I wouldn't say it is his best role is because you can't remember the performance without thinking of John Candy because
John Candy's movie.
The absolute heart of that movie.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, and it's funny because it does feel like it's told more from the point of view of Steve Martin's character. Because he's the one that's got, the ticking clock and he's got to get home. But John Candy, you're absolutely right. He's the heart of that.
Everything's happening to Steve Martin's character. It's all happening to him. When he gets the car, John Candy is there to make life more difficult and also help get him home, as a quote unquote plot device, which is a real reduction of what he is in that movie. But just that you are focused on Steve Martin on Neil Page's journey to get home. He's just trying to get home to Chicago from New York to see his family, which is crazy to think that would not be an easier trip.
Right.
Now.
Sure. Well, this is pre-cell phones. So it makes sense. Yeah. I love in movies when they just have to justify why cell phones aren't working. When that would solve so many plot problems.
It's raining.
Yeah.
Guess I can't make a call right now.
What was it, the Oscars or what?
I have T-Mobile.
Somebody did a collection of scenes from horror movies of people not getting service. I don't know if that was just something that floated around the internet or if it was like on an award show or something. Very funny.
Could have been both.
I'm going to throw out another one from this era. Again, these are tougher because they're all really good performances.
Yeah.
But he's a straight man with things happening to him. And that is Father of the Bride. As the dad in Father of the Bride. I mean, if Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is an incredible, harrowing experience that not many people have that version of that experience. A lot of people have the experience of being the father of the bride.
Well, and knowing what goes into a wedding. And there are huge shoes to fill because the original George Banks was Spencer Tracy.
Oh yeah. I forgot he's done that a few times. He has Cheaper by the Dozen. So was Spencer Tracy?
No, Cheaper by the Dozen was not also Spencer Tracy, but it was another remake.
So that's a remake. He took on a Phil Silvers role in Sergeant Bilko. He took on a Peter Sellers role. Like, he is not afraid to step into someone else's shoes.
Yeah. And Spencer Tracy those are really big ones. Yeah. Really big ones. And then Clifton Webb played the father and was the original Cheaper by the Dozen.
Gotcha.
Father opposite Myrna Loy.
I don't have Cheaper by the Dozen on my list.
I don't either, although I just gotta say, I do think it's a really fun movie.
Yeah.
And he's really good in it. I even don't mind the sequel because you get Eugene Levy as the father of another group of 12 children and they're competing with one another at like a summer camp.
Ridiculous.
Or like a resort of some sort. Very ridiculous. But go ahead.
But getting back to Father of the Bride, you also get him teaming up with Martin Short again. Who was it in this doc? Lauren was telling me this today. Did Tina Fey said the only person that can make Steve Martin laugh is Martin Short?
I think so. Yeah. And then Martin comes over to his house because they were touring with their show at the time. So they're writing material.
But yeah, these are tough. I just wanted to throw that out because I just really like that movie. You know, I like Father of the Bride.
It is really good. It's again, a top-notch cast all the way around. And his journey of being a father who's terrified at the idea of his little girl getting married because it's still his little girl and he doesn't want to lose her. And for her to be married is losing her. And his journey to realizing that your family's not getting smaller when your daughter gets married. It's actually getting bigger. And when you realize that, then, you know, he has the realization and makes the wedding happen. And it's very sweet and very touching, which is really interesting because he didn't have a child until like in the last
2012.
10 years. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So he was not a father, but played one brilliantly there. And I'm going to use that as a springboard to talk about what I think could possibly be the winner, which is his role as Gil Buckman in Parenthood. That is number one, again, like just a killer's row ensemble. You have Ron Howard directing and you have Steve Martin who has this amazing like turn. The whole film, if you have not seen it, please do, is about family dynamics and his relationship with his father and how that affects everything in his life, including having a son who has anxiety that's trying so desperately not to be his dad.
Yeah.
Because of the cold relationship he has with him and just the arc he has is incredible. And I'm trying not to cry. It culminates in that scene of seeing his youngest son in the school play and everything's going wrong. And he's had his own anxiety about everything all along. And it just becomes this roller coaster, which they had alluded to earlier in the film of like, you know, just go for the ride when his grandmother tells him that. And, it just becomes him on the roller coaster. And you see this turn in him of being able to appreciate his family and appreciate the imperfections rather than feeling like they all need to be fixed. And that's so beautiful. And he plays it with such pathos that even like the worst thing he does, which is suggesting to his wife who's excited about being pregnant, like, are we going to keep it? Like he's so detached. He's at his lowest maybe in film time, 5 to 10 minutes before that moment, but it's so powerful. And everything he does from like watching his insecurities play out to getting like some old school Steve Martin when he's Cowboy Gil and comes to save the day at his son's party and pulls out a bunch of wacky stuff that including your lower intestine, which is almost an exact lift from his stage act when he would do balloon animals on stage. It's just such a complete performance. And it was like sort of marked a change in, oh, he can do this. Cause you wouldn't have thought like it's a real challenge for a guy who has done so much wacky stuff. For him to be able to ground himself like that for an entire movie is just, I think the whole movie's a masterpiece and his performance in it is great.
Right on. I'm not going to lie. I have not seen that movie since Leaf Phoenix changed his name to Joaquin.
Sure.
I saw that movie when I was a kid. I watched clips in preparation for this. It's been a while since I've seen that movie in its entirety. But you're making me want to go back and watch it again in its entirety. Because I do remember that movie being, I think I was too young when I saw it to really understand all of the nuance of the drama of it.
Yeah.
Because I was like, this is a Steve Martin movie. Why isn't he wackier?
I remember enjoying it as a kid.
I did enjoy it. I enjoyed it as a kid.
Didn't get the vibrator joke at 12 at all. But watching it again, that is a movie that appreciates over time, so you can enjoy it. You can enjoy the wacky, you enjoy Cowboy Gill because it's a vintage Steve Martin comedy bit as a kid, and then you become an adult and you're like, oh, this is like, he's doing a lot of nuanced stuff, and he's in there with like an army of Oscar winners and is able to lead that ensemble, which is, you know, like you said, it's a different challenge than carrying a film on your own, but it's also a big deal to be in there with Jason Robards and Diane Wiest and Mary Steenburgen.
Yeah.
And Keanu Reeves, just Keanu Reeves it's such a good performance.
I forgot Keanu Reeves is in that too. Yeah.
He has, I know I've talked about this before. I'm going to say it again because I have an opportunity to. The moment where he talks about what a terrible father his father was.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, you need a license to drive a car. You need a license to catch a fish, but to let any but women be a father. And then like so it's this deep, profound realization. And then he shakes it off and becomes Keanu Reeves, the happy-go-lucky guy again, and walks out the door because he has to take his wife, whose head he has partially shaved, to cheerleader practice.
Jeez.
But it's such a good role and such a great performance. So it's got to be up there.
I have a couple more on. Do you have others on your?
Yeah.
Okay. I will throw out another one. One that I really loved from back in the day. I think we got some good Steve Martin, Master Showman. We got another good arc, good redemption arc of a character. And that is Leap of Faith. Him playing a carnival preacher, touring a tent revivalist preacher in, it's like they gave the town some name. It's like Rust Seed or something. Like they gave it a hilarious, of course, that like what a playwright would name a town that was about something like this. Yeah. It seems very much like a play, but I liked him in that. I thought he and Deborah Winger worked really well together in that. And we did get some stagecraft from Steve Martin, as well as some play close to home, heartfelt performance moments in that. Yeah. Thoughts on Leap of Faith?
Yeah, it's a big swing. It was not a hit. It did not connect at all.
No, it was a whiff, but I loved it. I thought he was great in it.
I remember going like, well, I don't want to watch him as a preacher, which is, obviously something you would say when you're 15 years old and that movie comes out. But maybe that's one of the bigger problems with this. People look at it like, I don't want to see him do this.
Yeah.
But obviously he did a great job as Jonas Nightingale.
I knew it was something ridiculous, but he also is he's got more swagger in that one than he had. Like a lot of times he does play the sort of put upon everyman. And the fact that he is just like, he's like Elvis in this. He's all swagger, but it's really grounded. And he's playing a guy who is really good on stage, which is what Steve Martin is a complicated guy who is very good on stage.
Right.
So I think I thought that was a great performance from him.
Yeah, it is. I'll give you one more.
All right.
And an honorable mention, because I know you like the honorable mentions.
I do.
I want to honorably mention Harris K. Telemarker, which is his character in LA Story, which is such a bizarre, like,
so weird.
It's like French New Wave and Italian and like all these weird things that he's brought in. It's a love letter to his hometown.
It's John Lithgow with amazing hair.
Yeah, it's a fun performance, and the movie it certainly hits
light,
differently
it's
when
fun,
you live
it's
in
cool.
Los Angeles.
Yeah,
but I don't think it's his best role. One I do want to call out, number one, because I think it's a really good role. Number two, because I think the movie is outstanding, is Bowfinger.
Yeah,
I feel like people don't talk about Bowfinger enough in his canon of work, and it's obvious because he's got other huge hits here. C.D. Bales in Roxanne is another great one.
Yeah.
That's also a really good role. I don't know that there's he doesn't have as much of an arc there. He has the same arc, obviously, that Cyrano de Bergerac has. That
was my last one, was going to be Roxanne.
Yeah.
I loved him in Roxanne. The dart scene where he's got to come up with 20 different insults about his nose.
Yeah.
He's good at pathos, and that, that's one thing that he excels at is, sad clown. And, Cyrano de Bergerac is just all of that pathos on display.
Yeah. 100%. He's very good in it. It's really great.
Bowfinger's a lot of fun. Silly, a great satire. Did he write Bowfinger as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Clearly, obviously.
Yeah. And I was going to say, it almost feels like an Albert Brooks thing. Bowfinger, for some reason, has like Albert Brooks vibes to me.
I could see how it would have like an Albert Brooks feel to it. We have to do best Albert Brooks movie at some point.
Sure.
By the way.
Sure.
God,
it's defending your life.
I mean, spoiler alert. Yeah, Bowfinger's really good. It's amazing that you can get Eddie Murphy to do a movie with you because he's a fan of yours.
Yeah, right? Oh. But yeah, that was the last of mine on this list.
Really great role. So what do you think our finalists are out of these?
I think our finalists are, based on your pitch alone, I think Parenthood. It sounds like we are taking one from each of these, maybe.
Gil Buckman and Freddie Benson. Is that what you want to do?
I think it's Gil Buckman from Parenthood and Freddie Benson from Dirty Rotten Scoundrels.
Oh, it's a good final too.
It's a good, right?
You know what, Mark?
What?
I want to thank you for being open to not having it be just we have to take one from each.
No,
it happened naturally, and I think that's
it did
wonderful.
happen naturally. Again, this may be biased because I haven't seen Parenthood in so long.
Right.
And I was a kid when I saw it, so it didn't necessarily resonate with me as much. That said, if our job is to objectively answer subjective questions,
right,
I think there is something that Dirty Rotten Scoundrels has in its favor, which is he gets to be Steve Martin. He gets to do wacky Steve Martin things with frequency throughout that movie. And it's like his character is driven. He has a very specific point of view and drive and goal through that movie. And the way to achieve that goal is by doing Steve Martin-y antics. You know what I mean? So it's Steve Martin antics. It's the Steve Martin antics from The Jerk, but with a purpose. You know what I mean? And plus we get toward the end, we get some of his comeuppance, or what's the word I'm looking for? Redemption as this character, Freddy. So there is some depth that appears in Freddy by the end of the movie. But I just think there's so many tentpole scenes in that. There's so many classic moments. There are people who don't know Steve Martin who know, can I go to the bathroom? Thank you. You know what I mean? Like, it is that to me. And again, maybe it's because I haven't seen Parenthood in so long, but if we are looking at just those two side by side, I want my best Steve Martin role to be a comedy.
All right. I'll give the counter argument to that, or the argument for, I'm not going to argue against Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. I'll argue for Parenthood, which is that it is also a comedy. It is a comedy and a drama at the same time. And I think it's the thing that interests me the most about it is what happens to Steve Martin when you take away the stage shtick and say you have to be a completely grounded person. And the only time that you really go to that crazy place is when, as a dad, you are desperate to do whatever you can to make your son's birthday the best birthday that it can be. And so as you figure it out, you see him like slowly turn into stage Steve Martin as he tells the shooting the cowboy and his guts slipping all over the floor and the hole keeps getting bigger, and then falling off the horse when he makes the jump of the high, and then falls and has to get up. Like, there is a bit of vintage Steve Martin in there, but so much of it is this challenge of, can you play a dad? Can you convince me, as someone who is notedly like at arm's length with everybody in his life, that you are a doting father that cares more than anything about what happens to your kids, and you're scared like hell that your oldest son is going to have a terrible life because of what you do, to the point that you have those dueling fantasies. One, when things are going well, of him graduating the top of his class and like this great looking guy. And then the nightmare of he's in a bell tower and he's still trying to encourage him by going, "Great shot, son." So to me, I'm just blown away by the layered performance of that without being able to go over the top.
I get that. And I get, but also
you make a good point. It is vintage Steve Martin.
And that, I think, is the thing. Like, what you said at the top of that, you said, if you strip away all of the comedy and the antics, can Steve Martin pull this off? and he does it successfully. But I stick with I'm stuck on the top of that. It's like saying the best music Eddie Van Halen ever played was the time they took his guitar away. You know what I mean? Like, right. I want it to be, I want my Eddie Van Halen to have a guitar. I want my Steve Martin to have some naughty little wink in his eye of wacky antics.
To me, like, I would love to play Freddie Benson. Like, I feel like not that I could do it the way that he did, but you
don't have to. Norbert Leo Butz didn't do it how he did.
It feels like, I kind of know what I'm doing in this.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I have a roadmap. I know when I can be silly and when not. And that's fun to play off of. I'd be scared as hell to play Gil Buckman.
You could play Gil Buckman.
I would be terrified because it's so honest.
Yeah.
It's so honest all the way through. You can't hide behind anything. And that terrifies me.
But I want my Steve Martin to be hiding behind stuff. I want my Steve Martin antics. I'm sure that Wile E. Coyote is great at Shakespeare.
Who he did work with.
Who he did work with.
He has worked with Wile E. Coyote.
That's right. Steve Martin did work with Wile E. Coyote.
That's right.
Oh, is it Space Jam? Is that the Victor?
No, he's Mr. Chairman in Looney Tunes Back in Action.
Oh, Back in Action. That's what it was. Not Space Jam.
Another Chairman. Like way over the top performance.
Oh, I want some vintage Steve Martin in there. I want some wacky. I want the best Steve Martin role to, yes, he is a grounded actor, but I also want to see him spread his wings a little and have some comedy fun, which I get that he gets to do as Cowboy Gil. I don't know that. And again, maybe it's that I haven't seen Parenthood in so long and I've seen the rest of these movies way more recently.
Right.
But I want that vintage Steve Martin in there.
Yeah. I mean, look, there are a few choices here, probably including some that we didn't even mention. I don't think some we didn't mention, but of the ones.
The Owen Wilson, Jack Black, Steve Martin Neighbors movie.
Oh, the Big Ear? Were there birders?
Yeah. Birders.
Stu Preisler or Priesler?
I never saw that one.
I'm okay with it going either way. I'm certainly attached to Parenthood because I'm in awe of it. And, if I get into the mode of that Steve Martin mode of studying it and figuring out what works about it, that's something I would study, like really study hard at it. Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, I'll probably just sit back and enjoy. And maybe that's a point in its favor. So people of the world, can I reveal the answer?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. If you want the best Steve Martin role, and there are many to choose from, like take some time and watch some of his movies, especially some of the early ones. Watch Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. It is underrated. It was in his like run of.
How do we not even talk about that at all?
Flops. I think it's a good movie. I don't think it's his best role. Like, no. We're talking about roles here.
But he's doing it. He's playing a gangster and he's doing it like he's one of the Three Stooges.
Yeah. It's such a ridiculous movie. Another Carl Reiner, part of the
Man with Two Brains is unhinged lunacy.
Yeah. But, his best role is as a con man. Freddie Benson in Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, Asked and Answered. If you haven't seen it, check it out. And please watch Parenthood too and cry along with me.
Yes. Well, are you happy with this one, Hal? Are you okay with this? I promise you, I will watch Parenthood.
There are plenty of times. Look, there are a lot of times where I'm like, well, if it were just, we got this with Hal, I was talking to a microphone for an hour and a half or an hour or whatever, I probably would say Gil Buckman because there's no one to convince me differently even as I walk through stuff. But, that's the beauty of the two of us doing this. You've said something. I understand where you're coming from, and I'm comfortable with that being the answer.
Right on. Well, then this one is closed. Let me check my notes. Thank you, Hal Lublin, for that topic.
Oh, yeah.
There are many more topics to discuss, but please read. They mentioned me
on the podcast.
Please reach out to us on, please reach out to us via email at wegotThisPodcast@gmail.com, or
you can find us all over social media, including YouTube and TikTok at We Got This Podcast. We are on Instagram at We Got This Show. And of course, our Facebook group is the hub for the people of the world community. That is facebook.com/groups/We Got This Podcast. And I expect a lot of fun, remembering of Steve Martin roles in this one and a lot of people who will have very strong opinions. And that's why we love you. Thank you to producer Ken Plume, researcher Kate McManus, graphic designer Uri Kelman, and QA engineer Jen Alba.
And thanks, of course, to our musicians, Jonathan Dinerstein and Mike Furman, for our score and theme song, respectively. And thanks to you, the people of the world, for once again, y'all have every single week you do it. I don't know how you do it, but every week you do it. You give Hal and I a chance to sit down, catch up, and have a great time talking about the most important topics in the world. And it's all because of you and the community you've created. So to you, we say thank you, thank you, thank you. For Hal Lublin, I'm Mark Gagliardi.
Mark Gagliardi, I'm Hal Lublin. And don't worry, everybody. We got this.
We got this.
Maximum Fun,
a worker-owned network
of artist-owned shows
supported
directly
by you.